ICCM Conversations, Group Singing as Healthy Public.
Fabulous to see so many of you today. Thank you to Dave Camlin from Royal College of Music and the Trinity-Laban Conservatoire and many other fabulous places. And Helenda Daffern from York University, just across the way from us at York St John University, and the York Centre for Singing Science, and Katherine Zeserson, who is an independent strategic consultant who's worked with many partners, including the Music Generation, North Yorkshire Music Action Zone, based in Yorkshire, although all joining from different places, the London Philharmonic Orchestra, and Britain Peers Arts. So I think I'll hand over to you, Ray, if that's okay, and looking forward to the conversations that we have today.
Great, thanks, Jo. Firstly, can we just give a huge thanks to Jo and Ryan and Rory and Lee and Catherine, anyone else here from ICCM, YSJ. Just these have been such great opportunities to kind of disseminate knowledge and just kind of come together as a network. It feels like they've been able to really achieve something fantastic by hosting these events. So we feel really privileged to be part of the series that they've been developing, and well done to all of you for making these happen. They're fantastic. So yeah, this is a conversation. So how we've structured the session today is to try and give you as much opportunity to have a conversation about some of the things that might have emerged for you in the paper that we had published at the end of last year. I'm going to give a brief overview of the paper. I know some people will have read it and want to kind of deeply pull it apart, and some people will have won't have had the chance to. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of it, and then we're going to give you the opportunity to think about some of the themes that have emerged from it. It's really great for us. You know, it was quite a long time in the writing the paper. The research happened in 2018, and it took us a good part of a year to get it written up and through peer review to get it into the journal at the end of last year. So we always wanted to do an event that would help to share some of the knowledge that was generated by singers on the project in as broad a way as possible. And there are some people who were involved in the original project who are here today, as well as some very experienced researchers. So as a general invitation, just be aware we're a really mixed group of people. Some people will be feeling, oh my God, what am I doing in an academic conference? And some people, yeah. So just be nice with each other when you're chatting with each other. This is about kind of trying to make sense of what we can discover together. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what's in the paper. There is a link to the paper so you can follow it up. And I'm hoping that my colleagues are going to keep me very much to time. So this bit's due to finish at 20 past, and if it doesn't finish at 20 past, then someone's going to shout at me and I'll shut it down. So the paper was called Group Singing as a Resource for the Development of a Healthy Public, which we abbreviated to Group Singing as Healthy Public. Our starting place for it, and actually this is a starting place and a finishing place. This is a kind of an idea that emerged from the research, but had also been forming a little bit before it. And it's the idea that actually the benefits of music making generally, and perhaps group singing in particular, in this case, arise from this complex interdependence between a number of different aspects or dimensions of what's involved in the musical process. So when we were putting the paper together, it was very much with this kind of idea of music as what we refer to in the paper as an adaptive complex. So music is often about the performance of works. People are often performing something, a recognizable something, but music is also about the performance of relationships in a literal sense, we kind of suggest in the paper as well. And when both of these dimensions are harnessed, then there's a range of paramusical benefits, i.e. benefits that aren't necessarily musical per se, but which come out of the music. they might be, there's a lot of good research evidence to suggest that these happen at an individual level, very much so with group singing at a social level. There are cultural aspects, and also there are economic aspects of group singing now. Group singing, when it's used in the context of healthy publics, might be seen as something that can be a substitute or something that complements more traditional medicine or medical therapy. And the argument that the project that we were using this on was called the Fellowship of Hill and Wind and Sunshine. So this is work that myself and Helena, it came out of the work myself and Helena had been developing using exploring singing in virtual reality. And this was the culmination of some of that work, exploring music in virtual reality, where we took groups of singers up onto the tops of mountains and performed a song cycle commemorating the gift of land by a group of mountaineers after the end of the First World War. So they were our kind of core group of participants. And we also compared the experiences of those participants with another group of participants who were also singing regularly in choirs, but didn't participate in this particular project. So there were a few things that we wanted to explore about group singing. At the heart of what we were kind of, maybe what's emerged from this in terms of one of the things that we think is significant, is perhaps toward an understanding of the way that a number of what we might refer to as mechanisms interconnect when it comes to group singing. So at its most basic level, we're kind of suggesting within the paper that this whole process of musical entrainment is intimately connected with people's neurobiology. And because neurobiology, as the emerging field of interpersonal neurobiology is telling us, is a relational phenomenon, that the experience of being musical with each other entangles itself with our neurobiology. So some of the well-being effect comes as a result of the music entangling us with the neurobiology of other people, as well as there are also well-documented effects using a variety of neurohormones that we might think of as the happy hormones, oxytocin, endorphins in particular when it comes to group singing, and as we'll explain a little bit later, this idea of self-other merging, but also dopamine and serotonin to different degrees. So and actually this picture is probably only partial. You know, I've heard some researchers talking now about there may be more than 600 separate mechanisms at play when we engage in group singing. The argument that we're making in the paper is that it's the complex relationship between all of these mechanisms that is maybe to account for the way that people experience it. Some of this is really trying to understand something that I think we've known anecdotally for a long time, that when you ask people about what's great about group singing, people will often resort to the language of magic or transcendence or feeling transported by the music, as if you kind of lose yourself in the music. And so it's most Mercedes Pavlovich talks about these as magic moments, this sense that when we're being musical together, we're losing ourselves in it. And that certainly came up in this project. And some of what we're suggesting is that it's maybe to do with an adaptive complex of different mechanisms all working with each other at the same time. So how we conducted the research, there were three phases to it. In the first phase, we used a program called Sensemaker to undertake a distributed ethnography. So this is collecting stories, essentially, as far as possible, collecting stories by people in their own words. So encouraging people to share a story. We followed that up with a workshop, focus group workshop, involving some of the people that had participated to try and draw out some themes. And then we had a further interview with two of the participants, because one of the themes that emerged was to do with energetic transfer. So this experience that people were talking about feeling connected and transported and transcending your own sense of self, with two of the people that participated identified that as similar to the experience that they'd had as in therapeutic situations. So we were interested to see was there any kind of correlation between this kind of sense of energetic transfer between group singing and more therapeutic situations. The distributed ethnography using Sensemaker starts off essentially, it's with collecting micro-narratives, not rehearsed stories, two parts to it. People share a story and then they interpret their own story. So it's a blend of what we might think was more inductive and more deductive approaches. We're trying to capture people's stories as close to what the natural stories they might tell someone when they came in after the project had finished. They get home and they tell someone what they just did while they're making a cup of tea. The second half of the process is what's called self-signification. So interpreting the story that you've just told against a series of predetermined categories. And in this way, it builds up a data set that is both qualitative and quantitative. One of the advantages of this approach is it helps to reduce some of the bias that we knew would be in the research, because obviously for myself and for Katherine, we were involved as practitioners on the project as well. It works by people tell a story. There were prompt questions, so people tell a story about an experience that influenced you to get involved. Or what story would you share that would tell a younger person about a lesson about group singing? Or what story would you share with the local media? So people shared their story, mostly text-based, could be photographs, could be audio recording or video recording. Then the second part is that then the people were presented with a series of, mostly in this project, of triads, where people move their finger around the screen if they're using a phone, or use their mouse to move a bubble around a series of three separate dimensions. The idea is that people are interpreting their story against complementary dimensions. These aren't positive or negative. They're all they're all positive aspects of an experience. So we're trying to understand what's the relative significance that people attach to their experiences. I'm looking at the time and now I've got to race on. So the data that we get from this is of two kinds. Firstly, we get this geometric data that starts to give us patterns of significance, of signification, sorry. So the way that people interpret their story then tends to form patterns within the data, which gives us an opportunity to look at what these patterns might be telling us. So in this first triad, as we expected, most people in the overall survey were talking about the sense of connection, the sense of brotherhood or sisterhood with others in the group, rather than themselves or the world around them. So it's, as we know, group singing emphasizes the social connection. Behind each of these dots then, of course, are individual stories, and the stories themselves are probably really familiar in terms of people that have done this kind of work, or lots of the experience that people have had about group singing. Emotionally satisfying, like being snuggled in an enormous warm duvet. I can honestly say the best medicine so far. I made friendships I know will last after months of medical issues, and these stories are will be familiar to anybody who's sung or undertaken this kind of work. What was surprised us in the data was that the patterns were similar across the fellowship and the non-fellowship projects. So even though we thought that more people in the fellowship would emphasise the place, because we're taking people for walks in the majestic Lake District, that actually it wasn't that different, that actually this pattern stayed the same. So we were able to kind of infer from that this aspect of social connection is stronger even in the conditions where we would expect it to be for other things to become more significant. So it stayed significant. Similarly, when we asked people to interpret their experience against dimensions of physical health or spiritual well-being, lifting me out of our everyday experience, or mental well-being, most people, across both surveys, it was 99% of people interpreted the experience as being emphasising the spiritual and emotional dimensions, and that was the same across both. So even though we were taking people on extreme physical effort up 10-12 mile walks, sometimes taking 10 hours, people were emphasising the spiritual and emotional dimensions. And then in terms of what the thing we looked at the start, the relative weighting of the aesthetic dimension, making a good sound, having fun making music together, or these paramusical benefits, There were some differences here. We noticed that that actually in the group singing at the mountains, strangely, even though people were singing, there was very much a focus on works. People were less focused on the aesthetic aspects of what they were doing, and more on the paramusical. I'm going to skip through because I'm conscious of time. The next aspect in the theming workshop, we brought people together to look at the stories collectively. And what started to emerge when singers started to interrogate all of these stories together, there were some themes that started to come out, which were a lot of which was to do with this sense where we lose our language to be able to talk about it. What is it that we haven't got the language for but feel? Where singing takes us out of myself into another space. I felt my precious sense of self drifting away on a wave of harmony. This started to become one of the main themes of what we identified. So we followed it up with an interview with two of the stories who'd talked in their stories about their experiences of therapeutic situations as well, to compare their experience of this kind of subtle interplay of energy, what we might think of as transfer in the therapeutic literature, in terms of their experiences of both therapy and group singing. What we concluded in the end were a number of things. That yes, we think that group singing does support people in the formation of healthy publics. So this isn't not necessarily in the treatment of mental ill health, say, but actually as a preventative for things like for mental ill health, for example, and also for mutual recovery, so that people participating in group singing can have a benefit. For those people who don't have a medical diagnosis or something, it can be a way of maintaining health. Actually, there's a great story appearing in the news today about the effects of singing for long COVID. Although actually maybe that's more restorative. But yeah, so singing can be a way of supporting healthy publics. We're suggesting that the social bonding effect of group singing is apparently invariant even in the face of other disrupting influences, i.e. outdoor exercise. That the spiritual and emotional aspects of group singing outweigh the physical, which is interesting in terms of we're often using singing as a way of addressing physical health issues, but actually it's the spiritual and emotional dimensions that people find significant in their stories in this research. Also, that distributed ethnography as a method has value as a way of being able to understand something about cultural experience, and that it's a way, this approach is a way of putting people's lived experiences at the heart of understanding cultural value, whilst recognising that while phenomenology might not be able to do necessarily the heavy lifting in terms of understanding why things happen, it can help us. It can work like a sniffer dog and point us in the direction of where we need to understand some of these mechanisms in more detail. So starting with people's experience might help us to direct future research in understanding what are the most significant things to explore. We've advanced this theory that music is an adaptive complex. I need to finish. That musical quality it works when it's across both of these dimensions. That healthy relationships underpin healthy publics, and music and singing in particular provides the conditions of what one of the therapists thought of as safe danger, a space to experience relationship, but without the sense of being overwhelmed by the intimacy of close relationships. So singing might work. We need to do more research on that, and opportunities for future research. We questioned who is group singing good for. I'm going to skip through all of that. We raised some questions. Maybe group singing is good for the people that it's good for. Who isn't it good for, and why not? If group singing is so good for everyone, why doesn't everybody sing? And there were obvious limitations. There were 166 people took part in the research. 2 of us were involved as practitioners, so there's probably all kinds of bias that might be seeping into the research. And this idea of the sympathetic entanglement of neurobiology and musical entrainment is something that we think is probably virtually impossible to test through a purely scientific method, because there are so many mechanisms involved that to try and look at all of the mechanisms simultaneously would be methodologically, impossible. And actually, that's why we need to understand the experience of group singing as a way of understanding what might be like the essence of it, so that essentially a more scientific understanding and a more phenomenological understanding of group singing need to work together. That essentially both are essential as ways of understanding the phenomena of group singing, and neither is sufficient on its own. That's so hard. I'm sorry if that felt like a race through. I think we are recording this as well.
Nailed it. And the Prezi is available to people. It's been put in.
Yeah, so no, do go in and kind of explore it if you want to. There's more in there.
Could I just add a thought? And then Helena, I'm sure you've got a few thoughts to add as well, just before we jump into breakout rooms. I just wanted to voice something that came up for me a lot as the article was being written. My role really was to keep reading and responding and questioning and adding a kind of slightly detached perspective, because I don't live and work in the academic frame of reference at all. I live in the policy making practice space. And what I kept coming in and out of is that sense, on the one hand, of well, isn't this absolutely the art of the bleeding obvious, i.e. if it wasn't all true, then nobody would be bothered, right? We wouldn't bother with doing all of this if all of this wasn't true. So on the one hand, as a practitioner and as a singer and as an artist, I was kind of in that place. But then on the other hand, as someone who spent my life trying to change the system and change the model and change the strategy so that the benefits and opportunities available to us through musical participation are equitably available and multiply and diversely available, what I found really alluring about this way that the argument was unfolding was the way it offers multiple entry points to understanding. And I think this idea that the lived experience as a sniffer dog, or the phenomenology as a sniffer dog, to the other ways in which knowledge might be formed through the analysis of singing is a really interesting thing. And if you think of it from the point of view of the singing practitioner, those of us that spend, or have spent hours a day with a group, you're constantly absorbing unanalyzed information and insight about these processes that are unfolding. So actually, what would happen if practitioners were always drawing this out, always drawing it out, always accounting it, and building that kind of, international distributed ethnography of stories? I just want to put that out there, because the more my hypothesis would be, the more stories entered the database, the clearer would be the themes that would emerge, rather than the more diffuse. And that might facilitate, a real militant shift around policy investment and kind of social construction. So that has been really interesting me in the whole of this process. Helena, is there anything you wanted to add?
I'm very conscious of time, and actually I think I'd rather respond to what people have got to say about the paper. The sniffer dog analogy is a brilliant one, Dave, but I think it comes from all perspectives. And as someone who often looks at micro level singing together at the micro level, so synchrony, those sorts of things, this is the other end of that spectrum, if you like. But I think that whichever bit you go into from a research perspective, it's always going to be the sniffer dog. You're never getting the full picture. And to me, that's why it's always exciting, no matter which level you're going in at. But I don't want to say anything other than that. I think we'll let people digest what Dave's just been talking about, talk about it amongst yourselves in that safe space, and then we can reflect on that, and whoever's most appropriate to respond to things, we can do that.
Can I say there's something that Helena said when we were talking about this that I was hoping you might say. You'd said something along the lines of, if we always start from what we can measure, then we only ever get a partial picture. If we only start with the things that we can measure, Whereas if we start from experience, we might not be able to measure it in the same way as the things that we've got methods and mechanisms, and tools for measuring with, but it might point us to how we need to develop more sophisticated tools to understand what's going on.
I'm really glad I said that.
That sounds great, Helen.
Great.
Really nailed it there. Shall we jump into the breakout rooms then?
We invite you to pause the video and access the Google Doc and other links in the video description below. Feel free to add to and share the document. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to the ICCM account.
Okay, I think we might be all back now. I think a few people have had to drop out the call early to go and pick up the... So, Katherine, should I hand over to you?
Great, thank you. Fantastic, really exciting. So if you want to continue to have reference to the Google Doc, please do. I'm not going to share my screen because it's nicer for me to be able to see, at least some of you and keep scrolling across my screen. So Dave has just grouped your points. So we've got a group of questions around digital domain, a group around what we've loosely called society, a group around repertoire, a group around environment, and a group around methodology, and then of course future work, and then there are a number of thoughts and reflections. So you can retain access to the Google Doc. It's not going to be robbed from you after the event. So you can go in there and see those or take copies of them or whatever you want. So what we'd like to do for the next 15 minutes or so, 15 or 20 minutes, is just explore some of these. And what I'd like is to hear from some of you on this. And we're all pretty Zoom experienced now. Okay, so I've got 3 screens of you, but I have spotters. So it's not only my eyes that are looking at the screen. I'm going to put out a couple of the questions and invite people to do brief contributions, bearing in mind the airtime and the number of people we've got on the call. A couple of brief contributions to each of the questions. So use the reaction button at the bottom of your screen and press raise hand if you'd like to come in on the point that I'm going to put in the space. And then I'll also refer back to Dave and Helena, and we'll be able to explore 1 or 2 of the big questions, and then I'll invite Dave and Helena to comment on some of the others, but, we're really happy to connect with people outside of this space. So that doesn't have to be the end of the conversation. So that we've got 4 questions here that relate to the topic of what one might loosely call society. So we've got, how might the social demographics influence the ways in which the lived experience manifest themselves? In what ways might the cultural aspects of music impact the universal impacts of neurobiology? Is singing always singing? Love that. Or does the word singing elide differences in practice? Are we guilty of blurring lines between practices that are in fact different? Wondering how pre-existing community cultural heritage, etc., affects people's desire or need to participate in singing groups, which touches on the "is this always good for people" thing. And singing as a form of social engagement. Does the motivation lie in the music or the engagement? So what about demographics? What about culture? What are the factors that inform both participation and the way in which what we imagine to be the universal impacts of our neurobiology might affect us? So would anybody in the group like to share an experience from your practice, or an insight from your research, or an observation on that topic of demographics and culture and how they may be impacting on the results that we're reporting here?
Go on, Deborah.
Oh, okay. I just keep talking about the same thing. I'm involved with Yiddish song, and I think it's very interesting. I'll just say something very briefly. It's very interesting that from when I learned Yiddish songs as a child in so-called Hebrew school to now, it is a world of difference in the attitude that people have towards Yiddish singing. It's now exploded with, all kinds of singers from all over the world learning and studying the field recordings and singing, you can use cosmetics as an example, singing for world audiences, and it's just a very simple reflection on how that very little piece of singing world has changed in relationship to the world.
Brilliant. Thank you, Deborah. Sue Scott, I think, wants to come in now. Sue, where are you?
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's this sort of two levels of biography in a sense, and I'm kind of noticing in your references, you reference Pierre Bourdieu, and I think there is that sense that a lot of people, certainly in the UK or European context, feel they don't have the right kind of cultural capital to sing. There's an assumption that you need to be musical. What does that mean? That you should be able to read music, that you should be able to play an instrument, etc. So there's that we might talk about it roughly into social class terms, and how we explore that and how that varies in a wider global context, the meanings of that. And then at the individual level, the very specific experiences of just not fitting. If you're a girl and you don't have a nice high pipey voice, then you're told that you can't sing, or if you're a boy and your voice breaks at the wrong moment. So there's those individual biographical matters too, and I just think that's the background to the barriers. A lot of the barriers that mean people don't get there to start with.
Mm-hmm. And I know if Professor Graham Welch was still on the call with us, he would at that moment wish to say that should be regarded as a transgression of human rights, he would say. And he would, that's always been his very profound argument for music in early childhood and education, that if we are disbarred from the space right from the get-go, then that is in fact a transgression on our human rights. So the point becomes a point of choice. We should have the capacity to choose to participate from a position of psychological security. Anybody else want to weigh in on any point about demographics and culture? Dave?
June has a hand up.
Oh, I couldn't see.
June Boyce Tillman.
June, please.
Yeah, well, I suppose I wanted to share a quote that's got me into difficulties in the past, but it's not actually mine. It's King's College, Cambridge has done for singing what Barbie has done for women. Everybody feels they failed. And it more or less summarizes, I think, what's happened to some social classes. And that I think I know that you've put aesthetic and participatory, but in our group we were discussing that there are two aesthetics out there. One is the King's College, Cambridge, the perfection, the product, and we don't really care how it's arrived at. The other is the participatory aesthetic, which has its own aesthetics. It's another aesthetic, and these two aesthetics are there, locking and sometimes operating quite happily, but sometimes locking horns over who's best and so on. And I think that the King's College, Cambridge, everybody expects me as a musician to say how wonderful it is. And indeed, there's a bit of me that says it is, but it has had a disastrous effect on singing in our culture.
Absolutely. And then there's that interplay between aesthetics and class, which
absolutely,
peculiarly in this country is absolutely, it sucks the oxygen out of the discourse. Dave?
Can I just come back? I think that's a great example of what we mean with this idea of an adaptive complex, because both of those dimensions are at play. And you can imagine. Yes, you can imagine some situations where it's just a performance aesthetic, and some situations where it is might just be a relational aesthetic. But most of the time, it matters what we're singing, and it matters that it's us that's singing it. But it's where repertoire comes in as well. It's important that it sounds, for everybody participating, we want it to sound good, so that if anybody is listening to it, it's not just us. If anybody is listening to it, that we feel proud of what we've done. But it really matters as well what it is that we're singing. What is the repertoire? Is this the song that this group of people always sing whenever we get together? What does it mean culturally? It's the music itself isn't a neutral medium, and I think that's one of the things that often gets missed in a scientific study, is just trying to look at or could get missed, and what in terms of what might be going on. The song itself matters, and the quality of the music matters.
Yeah.
It isn't just any old music. It's all of these things that are involved in the interplay.
Absolutely. Let's go hear from Jodie and Sheila, and then we'll maybe move on just to a slightly different topic. But if you've all got thoughts on this one, shove them in the chat or shove them in the Google Doc. Jodie and Sheila, your thoughts on this one?
Thank you. It occurs to us that we might be the only people here who are singing with people who didn't come in order to sing. So because I'm an English language teacher and Jodie is a natural voice practitioner, and we have a joint practice, we've worked together for the last 6 years. And what happens is at the beginning of every session with our group of women, we have a natural voice warm-up and we sing. That's not why people come. The women come for the purpose of learning English and to build community, to become more integrated into local services and so forth. But this has now become an absolutely essential key foundation, rock solid, essential at the beginning of every session when we're together. So we don't sing for performance at all, and we don't sing necessarily to make a good sound, but from a kind of demographic and cultural point of view, we've got a group of very disparate and diverse women who don't share a common language. We don't sing in English, so Jodie's choices of song are that we are equalised. We don't sing in a language that anybody understands, so there's no cognitive load on anybody who can join the circle.
Very nice. Dave, last point on this, and then I want to move us to another
Sorry,
topic.
I just wanted to follow up on that because I think it's so important. That's part of what I think we're hinting at in this paper, that singing might provide us with an opportunity to form relationships on the common basis of our neurobiology. We all have, as human beings, we all have a neurobiology, and singing gives us an opportunity to connect, to form relationships on the basis of that neurobiology, not on the things that might divide us, our biological differences, our cultural differences. And I know that's quite a complex interplay between those things, as somebody's already kind of highlighted in one of the questions. But I think that's part of the reason why singing might be a resource for transcending some of these boundaries, because it appeals to our common neurobiology.
I'm going to move us into a group of questions about the digital domain. Can these methods be replicated for these working now in the digital domain? What changes might be needed? And does the singing have to be real? We are noticing virtual singing, as in not together but singing apart, can still be therapeutic. I'm going to ask Helena to make a couple of comments on that first, and then again, put your hand up in the group if you'd like to come in with your experience or perspective on the digital domain aspect of the question. Helena.
Yeah, so it's obviously hugely relevant at the moment. Virtual choirs have been thrust into the limelight because if we want to sing together or maintain our choirs in some way at the moment, it has to be in a digital form. These are all really pertinent questions to a paper that's coming out very shortly that was based on a survey that we've done of choirs during the first UK lockdown. What we wanted to try to take advantage, if you like, of the fact that something has been taken away, and look at some of the questions that you have in some of the other sections, like society. So singing as a form of social engagement, does the motivation lie in the music or the engagement? Well, part of what happens with our current virtual choir models is that the elements of that engagement are taken. We cannot sing together in real time, making music together. I'm going to avoid the word aesthetic based on the conversations we've just had, but what it means to be in a sonic physical space together, to be co-creating at the same time, that has been taken away from us because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so what we did was we surveyed choir members as to their experiences of using virtual choirs, and what we found, to paraphrase ourselves very much, is that yes, people gain benefits from what they're doing virtually, but the magic, this thing that we can't use our language to talk about effectively, is lost. We've lost that in our virtual choirs. So it's been a very interesting process in terms of, once something is taken away, we can then start to potentially put our finger closer towards what it was that's not there anymore. So it gives us yet more food for thought, still lots of complexity, And it also highlights this question of what is singing. So what do we class as singing together? So if we're doing research into choirs, if we have a choir on Zoom, are we still a choir? Or are we simply a group of people with a common interest who want to sing at the same time? I'm not pulling any conclusions about that, but those are the sorts of questions that come up. So, or are we getting benefits from something else? So there's lots to unpick in the virtual choirs. And there's two main models that you may have explored with virtual choirs, which might be a Zoom type live conferencing session, such as we're having now, where everybody mutes themselves and sings along. So you know you're sharing an experience, although it can't be sonic co-creation, or multi-tracking solo voice recordings together, where you record yourself with the backing track, you submit your recording, they're multi-track together, and we get a choral sound out of it, but we haven't co-created it at the same time. And they're two very different things. They're two very different lived experiences, which will enable different benefits, so different value to the individuals that are taking part. And in terms of whether or not we can use digital domain to do the research, yes, is the simple answer. But of course, what we have to be very careful in thinking about what the experience is that people are exploring of themselves.
So I'd love to hear if anybody wants to share their experience of working in the digital domain. We've got a point in the chat. What is a choir? Great question. And also June Boyce-Tillman reminds us that she's doing some work which is actually live singing on Zoom, which people can explore. June, maybe you can shove the link in the chat if that's possible. That would be excellent.
Yes, please, June, because I'm aware of this, and I have to say it's one of the things when people have got in touch with me and said, you work in virtual choirs, can you solve the latest
problem? So chat to June. So Claire LRA wants to speak, and then Shani from Indonesia, and then Sarah Gray. So we've got Claire, Shani, and then Sarah Gray so far. Claire.
Yeah, as somebody who started this process, I run community choirs in Kendal. I love it, absolutely love it. Got onto Zoom, loathed it, cried every time I had to do it. But people were being connected, and people were singing, and people were still loving it. And therefore I, invested a bit in the technology, which I thought I would never do. But I now successfully run my groups on Zoom and have and really get the sense that people are still getting a lot out of it. And so much so, realizing that was possible, I've started a group, I was explaining in the group setting, in the small groups, for childless not by choice women who often are devastated by their childlessness and need spaces where there aren't like people bringing their babies on screen and because they're triggered by that kind of experience. So getting together to sing together, I did an experiment to see whether that could still be joyful and connecting for those women, could still give them a sense of singing, a good experience of singing, and could give them a good sense of connecting with each other. And without a doubt, it was successful. And people really began to find their voices, not just their singing voices, but their voices as childless women who are often kind of shamed by their childlessness. It's not everyone's experience, but it is quite often the case. And so I'm fascinated as I was listening to Dave's presentation by how, does it have to be, as Helena says, does it have to be group singing in the room? They're not getting the sonic experience, or they're getting part of it, because I have backing tracks and all that stuff, that I've recorded, all the parts. So they get to sing against me and they get to sing against a backing track. They hear all the parts, all of that kind of. So I was just interested in that.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are other people on the call who's sharing that experience. We're going to hear from Shani and then Sarah Gray. And then really tragically, we're going to have to move on. There's lots of interesting stuff in the chat. And do keep throwing things in the Google Doc. Shani, please, and then Sarah.
Hello, hi everyone. I'm Shani from Indonesia. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I want to respond about what's Helena's been talking just a few minutes ago. I'm starting to sing since my early childhood. I think since my 6 years old until now. And when starting the pandemic, my group and I, we were figuring how to still sing. So we're also trying to use the Zoom. However, a couple of times we're trying, but still for me and them, it's like there's something missing. So I think it's better to sing maybe not really in a big group like it used to be, maybe 5 or 10 people with social distance, of course, and we will feel happy again. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. I just want to hear from Sarah. Helena, can you hold your thought? And then I'll bring you back in after Sarah. Thanks.
Okay, so I just wanted to very, very quickly say one of the things, I'm a member of Blue Jam Arts, who's a Cumbria-based community music and arts organisation, and what Jilly Jarman has done is she's actually bought a few Soundtrap accounts so that the singers that we work with can actually create together. That's what definitely, you can get a free Soundtrap account where you can collaborate with one other person. That's something that you can look into. And I'm hopeless with technology, and it's dead simple. So that has enabled us to feel like we've got a connection with that group. And the way I feel it, it's all about maintaining those connections. And also, I run a daily sort of Joe Wicks of singing, which has been started which I've only been doing for the last 2 weeks with my colleague Alison. And we've been, honestly, we've got 100 people on the mailing list. It's just grown hugely, and it definitely feels like singing together.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, can you put that in the chat? Someone's asking for it, Sarah. What's that?
Yeah.
Soundtrap thing.
Soundtrap, yes, I'll do that.
You could put that in the chat, and maybe you could put the link to your Joe Wicks of singing, because we might jump up and down with you. Helena, you had a point to make. Yep.
I just wanted to kind of summarise what everybody said as saying this is absolutely reflects what we found from people, that they absolutely get value out of the virtual choirs that they've created. And virtual choir is a kind of rubbish term because it encompasses so many different things. But whatever that means to the individual, that they are getting value out of it. And someone commented in the chat about Jamulus, and I wanted to point out that the technology is improving all the time. We've been working on virtual choirs for about 6 years, trying to build a real-time virtual reality choir. We're still a long way off that, but we're moving towards it. And there are free software out there like Jack Trip that do allow a much better real-time experience. And it's getting easier all the time to implement that technology. So that I don't think for a minute that once the pandemic is over, virtual choirs will disappear. I think it's going to build a whole new world of choirs for people who can't access real choirs for whatever reason. I think that hopefully hybrid models will appear as well, because people can benefit from these, definitely.
Right.
Let's see where this space is going, because people are learning all the time about it.
Great. Thanks, Helena. I mean, maybe hybrid life is where we're heading after this. Who knows? So we're going to round that up now. Thank you so much for your engagement with that. And we will, as I say, the Google Doc remains accessible to you. Please throw anything else in the chat, and we can take things out of the chat, can't we, Joe? Harvest them and throw them in the Google Doc, and then they're all in one place, all the kind of references and ideas and things, so people don't need to feel anxious if they haven't quite caught something. So I'm going to hand back to Helena on what's next for the research.
Okay, so again, people have put various comments about how do we unpick the complexity of this, where do we move forward, and again, we are in the middle of a pandemic. We won't be forever, so we will be able to do real life research again with real life choirs joining together. I think that the way to move forward with this is for us to have these sorts of conversations. And I think that's what Dave, myself and Catherine wanted to have this session for, is we want to accept that we are only ever performing sniffer dog duties in our research. And there are many different directions that we could take the work of the paper or the things we've talked about today. And it's certainly not something that the three of us could do on our own. There's at least 100 years worth of research that we could get out of just today's session. But hopefully what we all agree on today is that the importance of a dialogue across different research disciplines. So whether it's ethnography or micro level virtual choir development, but also across professionals, across professional communities. And it's really important that we have that dialogue so that the sniffer dog is actually looking for something that's relevant to all of us in our singing lives, in our lives directing policy. So it might be that someone needs some evidence to elicit that change, or it might be that we need to understand better what is it about that experience of singing together that's beneficial, so that we can encompass that and develop our virtual choir towards it. Like taking the rhythm away, suddenly we can sing together. As June points out, there are ways to have a shared sonic experience if we think about the music. So I'm not giving an answer as to this is the next research question, but just to say that that's okay. And I think that for every research question that any of us start to answer, that will elicit more and more questions from practitioners, and that we need to maintain that dialogue. And that's what we hope to do moving forward. I'm sure there's lots more very specific questions. We haven't managed to answer everybody's chat message, and they're all really relevant and really interesting. I'll certainly be buying your book, June. Thank you for that. If anyone has anything particular they want to ask us, then we are all, I think, open to having email contact with you. And if enough people kind of get in touch, then we can bombard you with another Zoom chat. I'm sure we'd be really happy to do that as well. So thank you, everybody, for all of your contributions to this, because it's certainly given us more food for thought as well. Thank you.
So I think it's over to Jo now for the closeout. Jo, are you there somewhere? Can't find you on my screen. Oh, there you are.
Actually, everybody's response of clapping there was welcomed. So unmute and just to give Katherine, Helena, and Dave a massive round of applause for that. Woo! Woo!
Hey.
Yeah! Brilliant. And Dave, I feel you're coming forward to the screen, but I think you might be muted. So before
Sorry, have we got to finish? No, really. Sorry. There's a comment from Marissa Silverman in the chat from like about 15 minutes ago, and I so want to follow up on that. Have we got time to hear a little bit of that?
Well, we have to close out in 4 minutes.
Well, my clock says we've got.
It feels like sorry.
I don't know if Marissa is here. If you want,
she is, yeah.
Say anything very briefly.
For me, it's really exciting because a lot of the stuff that I've based all of my research on is based on ideas that have come out of Marissa's work. So it's fascinating to hear her talking about this.
We could seize the 6 minutes left. Marissa, are you there? Unmute.
I do not want to seize anything. No, but I will just raise the question, I guess, and it's for each of you who works in your own context to sort of figure out the political ramifications of it. The concept of aesthetics has a lot of baggage implications for the kinds of habits of mind that have tended to be engaged with and for. And because of that baggage, I wonder if sometimes we, and by we, I mean the professions at large, are not as mindful of the who and the what and the why we're doing what we're doing. So what I would love to see happen is to find another word, another concept to use that doesn't have as much baggage as June was saying, the way in which the king has sort of ruined singing for everybody. Is there a way to find a word that does not possess the kind of slant that aesthetics does. And I don't know what the word is.
I was just going to say, what is it, Marissa? Please.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Anybody got that word, Dave?
Well, no, just there might be some. This might be a good point in history to actually look at other disciplines as well, because we kind of notice in the visual arts in particular, there's a whole kind of movement around the notion of what the idea of relational aesthetics, that actually as an artist we can choose to locate the meaning of the art in the relationships that it constitutes. But that's very much a visual arts idea. So there's a lot of, the winner of the Turner Prize 3 years ago were a group of visual artists who basically took up residence in a street in Liverpool and said, that is our artwork. We are working in relationship with the people in this street, existing as human beings together. That's our statement as artists. So I think there's maybe more baggage in music around it, but I think the notion of singing maybe gives us different ways into it, but we need to look outside of our field. I think when we talk about the idea of relational aesthetics, or the idea that actually the quality of relationships that are occurring within a group singing situation is as important as the quality of the sound that we make, we know that hopefully we can subscribe to that view. But I think it's really interesting expressing it like that, Marissa, that we need to find a language for it, because relational aesthetics, I guess, doesn't actually make it any easier to understand.
Well, there's some suggestions in the chat. So we've got magic, we've got lived experience, and we've got enjoyment of song. So I think keep those thoughts coming in, maybe in the Google Doc. Are there can we build a new language and throw off the shackles of 19th century cultural policy?
I think we've come full circle as well, haven't we now? Because these terms come back to the fact that it's these cogs that Dave put up at the beginning working together. So we're trying now to pick apart some of the elements of those cogs, but once we get to lived experience and magic, how much is it, whatever this new term for aesthetic might be, is just part of a cog? Or are we trying to define the whole again? And so we've kind of come full circle, which is quite nice, really.
Well, and in the chat, we've even got, what does quality of sound even mean? So, we're now at the farthest edges of the existential discourse in relation to music, community, society, politics, and what it means to live well. So I think genuinely on that note, we should probably go back to Joe, because it is 15:29.
Thank you. I love the way these conversations open up so many different things to go. And I'm sorry about the noise of the dustbin van that's passing my house right now. Rory, thank you. So Rory has reminded me that in these final few moments, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you all to everybody that's joined today's call. It wouldn't be this event if it weren't for your contributions, your conversations, your questions and comments. So thank you everybody for being here today. Thank you also to the team presenting on this call, Helena, Katherine and Dave. And thank you to everybody at ICCM that works quietly behind the scenes, making the admin kind of magic happen. Before we go, I just wanted to draw your attention to our next ICCM Conversations event, which will take place on Thursday, the 18th of February. Same time, same place, see you on Zoom, 2 to 3:30 p.m. GMT. And that is going to be led by Lee Higgins, who's with us on the call. So Lee, if I could hand over to you, maybe you can tell us about that event on the 18th of February.
Hi, everybody. Thanks. It was a great session today. The event that I was going to lead is simply going to be asking the field, or everyone who's engaging in these things, to stop and reflect and just think about how might community music develop. So it's a conversation-based event, much like this, and we just want to sort of reflect on this question. It's a question that's been bugging me for a number of weeks, and I thought we had a space. It felt like a good time to pause, reflect, and just think, how might community music develop? And I'm going to write a little provocation and put it up on the website. There is something on the website at the moment. I'll put something else up there and just kind of invite people to engage in a discussion around how might community music develop.
Before people disappear, could I encourage people to, if you've got, we wanted to have something around things to do in the future, where might any of this go? If you're doing something that relates to any of the themes that we've talked about, can you put a link to it in the chat before you disappear? Or if you've got any events coming up, or if there are resources that you'd like to highlight, put them all in the chat, and then actually we can save the chat. We can add all of that into the Google Doc, so that it's there as a resource, or or Joe might send it round. But I think in terms of taking any of this forward, if there are things that you're doing, or things that you've got planned, or things that you're hoping to do, let's just throw them in there, and then that can become a resource for everybody to explore if they want to.
Absolutely, and Sheni has shared an epic idea of a global online choir. So Sheni, keep us updated if you move forward with that. Sounds fabulous. Yes, I will email the group after today with a link to the recording of this event, which you can view on our ICCM YouTube channel. The link is there, and I'll share the Google Doc link again with all of the chat relevant content from our chat down the side, populated into that Google Doc. So the only thing I need to say now is, if you'd like to know more about other ICCM publications, events, projects, things coming up, then you can join our mailing list. I apologise for any cross-posting. I send an email once to the group that joined the call, and then you'll get ICCM emails subsequently if you're interested. And I think other than that, there's not anything else to add, except for we have a variety of upcoming events. Do check them out on our website, and we hope to see you at more of them soon. Catherine, you've unmuted, so I'm sensing.
I was just going to say goodbye. I have to jump because I'm teaching at 2:45. So love to you all.
Thank you so
nice to spend time with you.
And on that note, I reckon we might say goodbye to everybody, unless you are in the ICCM group or was presenting. You might just want to stay on for one moment. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for today. Lovely to see you all again, one day in person.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Have a nice day.
You too.